everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Heart Podcast with Sandra J. Horton, the Growth Catalyst.
Hello, and a wonderful Thursday to all those around the globe. I'm so excited to come to you live on the Leadership Heart Podcast. Yes, my name is Sandra Horton, and I'm so excited to welcome an amazing woman leader who I'm very fortunate to know personally and professionally as well. And I'm going to be bringing up our special guest today, our Member of Parliament, Miss Bonita Zarillo. So Bonita, I'm going to bring you up as I read this beautiful good day to you. I'm going to read you a little bit of a bio because I like to honor you as my exceptional guest today. And Bonita is an elected member of Parliament for Port Moody-Coquitlam since 2021. And she's also serving as the NDP Critic for the Infrastructure and Communities, Disability Inclusion, and the Deputy Health Critic. Wow, that's a lot there, Bonita. As well as she's in the Standing Committee for Human Resources, Skills, and Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. And we're going to dive into that because that's a very powerful area to focus on. But importantly is that Bonita is known as the voice of equality in our communities. And she has absolutely driven systemic changes. She put people's first, and I know that for sure. Before coming to Ottawa, she spent 3 terms as a municipal councillor in Coquitlam, where she did some amazing work supporting so many wonderful people and the needs of the most vulnerable in our community. And importantly, she is champion and is always championed to buy local. And I remember when this really emerged in our community, and she's challenged the pipeline corporations. She is an advocate. She is an absolute amazing woman who's on so many different boards. But importantly, she's always inspired me as an exceptional woman leader. And I'm very thrilled to have you. Welcome, Bonita.
Well, thank you so much, Sandra. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, I can remember when we first sat together on a panel many years ago, and it just feels so wonderful today to come around and be on this show with you and on this program with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Bonita. That was a wonderful International Women's Day, which is coming up again next week. So yeah, it is almost a full circle moment that we're having in the Leadership Heart Podcast. So I want my viewers to really get to know you because there's so many powerful areas that we want to dive into. And on the Leadership Heart Podcast, I always begin with the 3 L's of conscious leadership: to learn, to live, and to lead. So let's dive into that learning phase and getting to know you a little bit. So can I ask such a bold but big question is, how did you get to where you are, Bonita? I mean, you've reached the highest pinnacle for many women, and being a woman in a leadership position, a woman in politics. So how did you get there? What is your story? What is your journey you'd love to share with my viewers today?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I guess the first thing that pops into my mind when you say that is nobody gets here alone. That these journeys are not solo journeys. They're definitely journeys that you meet many people along the way, and you get many learnings along the way. So that's the first thing that pops into my mind, because for a long time, like well into my 40s, I really was just getting up, commuting to work, doing work, commuting home, making sure that I was, getting to daycare on time to pick up the kids. Like I really was just in the grind. And it wasn't until later in my 40s that I started to have the time to start connecting more with my community and starting to spend more time with my community and starting to really integrate into what's happening in the community. And I think that's how I got here. I got here from slowing down from the grind. And I mean, there's some some of that was forced because Sandra, that I went through breast cancer, and that really forced me to take a stop and say, what am I doing here? And started really integrating more and more with the community. And that's when I found such a incredible path and such an incredible community to connect to.
Yeah. And you stopped, and what I appreciate, and I think this is a key learning for so many women and men, of course, but for particularly for women, when you're in that juggling phase in your life, and you have kids, if you have kids, or you're juggling a job, and just in that the rush or the busyness of being, you have to, whether it's circumstances that cause you to have that moment of stop, reflect, an illness or something, divorce, things happen in our world, and they give us this opportunity, don't they, to kind of go within. And I know with your background as well, I mean, you worked with individuals, in this area, that moment of kind of, I call it awakening to our purpose, our passions, our new opportunities. So when did that moment of, oh, I'm really interested in getting into politics, how did that emerge from this moment of, I want to do something, I'm enjoying my community? Where was that spark? What happened in your heart that kind of said, hey, this looks like this is where I want to go?
Yeah, I thank you for the question. And I think if I think back, it was probably in the early 2000s that I started being interested in climate and what was happening in the climate with the climate. And so I started dabbling a little bit into politics, but not in any really meaningful way, just getting involved in community information. And then it wasn't until probably about 10 years ago that some things happened locally in the community. I was looking for work. And I was trying to find out where in my community are the head offices, where are the businesses.
Mhm.
And second of all, one of the community parks, the swimming pool closed down. The outdoor swimming pools closed down. So then I got really interested in how do we revive that swimming pool? And that's when I started interacting with the city. So
Mm.
that's where it really started. I started interacting with the city because I was reaching out to the city to find out what are the businesses in town for work. And then secondly, I was reaching out to the city to ask, like, what can I do to get this, the community together to get this pool opened again? Because outdoor pools, and we know right now with the weather and the heat, that those outdoor pools are important. Those pools are
Mhm.
important, and swimming is a life skill. So I think that's where it first came, Sandra. I was like, you know
Mm.
what? There's some gaps here. There's some gaps around services, and there's some gaps around work. And I think it was specifically focused on work for women, because I was seeing a lot of parents at that point in time that were racing to the SkyTrain, that were racing downtown. I mean, I was with
Mhm.
them, getting on the SkyTrain in the morning and making sure to come back before 6 in the evening. And I thought, we need to find something more local. So it was really driven by my community.
Mhm. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, because what I'm called to ask you is, you took it to that next level and you became an advocate. So you're learning, you're taking in this information and saying, gee, how can I be a part of this? What place can I play to create that change? So now that you're becoming that change enabler, you became an actual advocate. So what shifted in you that you really stood in your own power? Because I think this is important for people to become your self-aware, but how do you stand in your power?
Yeah, that's tough. Sometimes it's really tough because
Mhm.
there's a lot of peer pressure, right? There's a lot of peer pressure, and there's a lot of socialization that says, we should act this way, or we should act another way. And so I think what really was different was when I got into city council, which was municipal, local politics at the very beginning. I didn't feel like a politician, but it sure
Mm.
felt a lot different than being out in business or to be in private business. It really felt a lot different because I started to see who had access and who did not.
Mhm.
And that's what really inspired me to want to stand up more for my community, because I thought, there is a disparity in who has access here. And I think that's everywhere with networks, right? We know that networks are important. And if you're involved in networks, or you have networks, there's always opportunities attached to those networks and those people and those networks. So that's really what it was, is I saw a difference in a disparity between the average community person that was out there trying to pay their rent, trying to pay their mortgage, or paying their bills, and then those inside that had access to their city councillors, and that maybe had more resources to have access to their city councillors. And I wanted to level the playing field there.
And I think that's, a theme that I've seen, watching your career and kind of your ascension, into the highest political realms, is, your fierceness. And I love the word fierceness and passion and commitment to, breaking barriers and really standing up for inequality. And I want to kind of dive into that whole thing about, living and challenging, inequality, and what does that mean for you, in your position now? Like, how are you championing, to reduce inequality in the workplace? I'll leave that open to you to kind of take where you feel inspired.
Yeah, I think it is that idea of making space. I always kind of say now I've got my elbows up. I'm not necessarily, not necessarily, it doesn't need to be my voice, but I need to put my elbows up to make space for other voices. So I think that's when I was coming on your show, Sandra, I'm like, where does that come from? And I think you've said this before, and I think so much about it, is like, your values are rooted, right? Your values are rooted, but where do they come from? And I think about my own childhood. I guess it so often goes back to your childhood. And I was a very quiet child. I was a very quiet, like shy, and not really very vocal, but watched a lot. I saw a lot.
Observer.
I was an observer. And I still am an observer. And I think I observed the inequities that happen in life, but also too, I traveled a lot. And I traveled to different countries and different I went to school in different schools in different countries. And I think that really made a difference, to be able to just observe and see that not everybody's life experiences are the same. And when I sit in that chair, it's my responsibility to elbows up and to make space for all of those, everybody's voice, and for experiences that I don't know anything about.
I love that, because, it's interesting. I was in a Harvard review, and I can't remember the year, but I was exploring and understanding effective communication, and how are men in some ways effective, and they actually make a bigger stance when they're talking. So when you're saying, standing up and making space, I'm thinking, it's interesting, isn't it? We do need to make space for people, but in a respectful way, understanding that how we process is indeed, yes, from our past. It's based on those limiting beliefs in some circumstances. And in other ways, it's like, how can I go and re-challenge those, especially when I'm choosing, because we have a choice, don't we, to live back then and there, or in the here and now, and choosing to challenge how, that bias is showing up. It's almost, I kind of want to dive into unconscious bias a little bit, that tends to show up in workplaces, it shows up in our lives, and we have to kind of take stock. So in these moments, so let's kind of move ourselves, you've moved from kind of the Port Moody, kind of the councillor Coquitlam area. Now you're in Ottawa, and you're building this space, and you're building these opportunities for yourself and for others. Have you had any kind of life lessons, if I may, in making that space, finding your space in Ottawa?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of halfway. I have learned some things, but I'm still learning. I'm definitely on the learning right now, because we've all gone through a very difficult 3 years, for one. And in Canada, we have experienced the experience of what happened in Ottawa at the beginning of the year, last year. And that really started to create two separate conversations in Canada. And whether those conversations were happening online, they are manifesting in our homes, they're manifesting in our communities. And I think what I've really learned, I mentioned to you earlier about, not everyone's experiences are the same. It certainly has me really evaluating when people are saying things to me that I think don't make as much sense or don't seem grounded in what I've experienced or what I know. How much of that do I need to open my heart and my mind to? And how much of that do I need to say, okay, that's not healthy for community, that's not healthy. So I think that's really been, there's been a lot of awakening that's happening across the globe and certainly a lot across North America. But this has really been a very interesting time in my political career, that there can be such a distinct difference in perception of what's happening in this country and what the future might look like.
And I'm going to reflect on that moment, because what it makes or reminds me of is the opportunity for connection, the connection to ourselves, to really go within, to challenge ourselves in how we see things, not from a conviction, but from an openness, like, as you said earlier, grounding within our values. And if we do value openness and, acceptance, etc., how can I do that? How can I, particularly through this COVID, I would say almost post-COVID, but it's still here, times, when people took very much, different and very powerful positions on how they saw this last couple of years. So how are you building the connection with others across the aisle? That's always an interesting thing for me, because if we are going to change the world, we have to do it together. We have to, link hands and find new ways to work collaboratively, respectfully. So I would be interested in if you're open to dive into that aspect.
And I agree with you on that. And I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to show it. Like, we have a responsibility to express it and to show it. And I think we have even more of a responsibility now as we see what's happening in the world, whether it's what's happening in Ukraine, Iran, now with the tragedies that happened in Turkey and Syria. We as leaders and political leaders, I believe, to even more responsible to show that we are committed to those connections and that we are committed to bringing people in and caring rather than like with actions rather than words. I think that we really need to do that. So that's something that when I was saying to you how I'm kind of going through the journey right now, that's some of the stuff that I'm going through right now is, sometimes there are situations in the House of Commons or situations with my MP colleagues that might not be on the same value, have the aligned values. What are the things that we can connect on and try to build from and grow from? And how do we externally show that it's important to have those conversations, but at the same time, still make sure you're shutting down actions and conversations that are hurtful and harmful to the community.
And that's a key piece. And thank you for sharing that, Bonita, because I wanted to raise that. I have for a long time, as you know, political aspirations. I love to create change, and I was pretty open about it. And I was very purposeful in, doing kind of that due diligence. I'm going to shift a little bit, because I think we are raising, our consciousness is raising, and people are waking up. And that's why I also talk about this, the 3 L's of consciousness. And, we have to do things differently. We have to be almost even more courageous than I think earlier generations, even though they were courageous in defending the rights of us in order to have the beautiful life that we have. I think we have to even be more courageous in how we look at our impacts on society, impacts through like the social framework, the fabric that, our climates, things like that. So, in your work that you're doing, Can you share with us, what are your passion, your areas that you're really focused on right now to help create that change, whether it's the climate change or working, with those who are with disabilities? Maybe you can dive into that, because I think that's a piece. You talk about action. You're taking action right now. Love to learn from you on that.
Yeah. And I hope I do see you in these chairs. You said the word courage, and and when I was like making some words be sitting beside me as I'm having this call with you today, courage is on my sheet here. And
Ah,
courage is on my
love that.
sheet. So I think courage is important, and there's there is privilege that comes with having courage.
Mhm,
And I think that's something that we just have to say out loud, that there is I'm I have some courage, but I also have a lot of safety net protection, right?
mhm,
So I
mhm,
think about climate change, right? I'm advocating for climate change because I can visualize and I can picture that I'm relatively safe. If I'm sitting here in Coquitlam, on unceded traditional territory of the Coquitlam, I'm sitting here and I'm safe. But if I think about the people that are in a Turkey right now, or if I think about what happened with the
mhm,
heat dome here not too long ago, the flood that happened out in the valley, those I feel those. I feel that desperation. I feel that freight train coming as
mhm,
it relates to climate change. And I really thinking about human suffering in that way really drives me to just want to stand up and say we need change, we need to stop. And I think one of the things that I will say, and I've seen this as elected officials, is that it's really easy for us to just sit back in our chairs and say let the train move slowly, but our governance and our politics are moving too slowly, and the climate change is coming at a barreling freight train rate. So I think that's what it is. I believe I have courage. I've seen that I am more courageous than other politicians, but I recognize it's because I have such a huge safety net. So let's pivot to persons with disabilities right now. So
mhm,
this is my portfolio. It's my file. I also did it for the whole time that I was a municipal politician. It was my file on disability. And we just think about the skyrocketing cost of living, the housing crisis, the lack of investment in affordable housing and accessible housing. We don't really have regulation around building codes that force all buildings to be accessible. We know that our healthcare system is somewhat in crisis right now, and I just feel it. I just feel it deep within me that the
mhm,
inequities are so great, and that we really need to move faster as legislators.
mhm. And if you were to imagine a future that would be that, not our current state, but our ideal state, what would you like to see in this regard?
Well, it's interesting because I watched a movie many years ago, and we were just talking about how North America, the director in the end was talking about how North America differs from other continents, and in how the
Mhm,
family unit supports each other.
mhm,
And I think what I imagine is that we are going to start coming back as larger family units. I think that's something that's being forced, even on the aging demographic, is that we're going to come back. And I just think, even if it's not the family unit, I think the community is going to come back together a little bit more. It's been very individualized in North America. We've had the last 3 decades, we've had a very individualized focus. It's very much about
mhm.
personal
Yeah.
success. And I strongly believe that the future is going to look like there's going to be a lot more interdependence in community. There's going to be a lot more coming back, more local in our communities. And I really look forward to that, because we know we have a lot of mental health challenges out there in this world.
Yes.
A lot of people that are feeling disconnected and um, don't feel seen. And I think there's a lot of room for us to do better there as society.
I love that. I thank you for that commitment. And each of us, I always kind of come back to what can you do as an individual? Connect to your heart, to your mind, to that higher purpose, the whatever that connection is for you, wherever you are in your life journey, you can make a difference. You just have to have that, as we kind of talked about earlier, that courage to say, what am I called to actually be able to do? And, there are so many people that, we can support if we are, we live in a place of privilege, or even if we're just struggling ourselves. I've found that the more I'm able to be of service, the more I'm able to give out, the more I actually receive in heart, of gratitude, of all those beautiful things that you reminded me of that, like in that next, like, a family. How can we reach out, how can we build these stronger connections, these ways of what can I give, what are my strengths, right? And I've seen you demonstrate that in all the work that you do. So I would love for people to be able to reach out to you, to connect with you. What is the best way, Bonita, if they want to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing, around, the fairness in this world, working with people with disabilities, changing these things. How do we get a hold of you if we want to connect with you or your, executive assistant, so we can have a chat?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm, as a member of parliament, my email is always open, bonita.zarillo@parl.gc.ca, but I'm also accessible on social media. I don't always have the ability to get back in a timely manner, but I'm always accessible on social media, also under all the Bonita Zarillo. But I'd also encourage your listeners, Sandra, not just for me, but any of your politicians in Canada. There's a site called openparliament.com, and there's a search bar in there, and you can search topics and people, and it actually will show you all the things that they've been saying and what they've been talking about. And I find it very helpful. I use it quite a bit just if I want to know what's been said about this topic, what's the legislation that's potentially happening about a certain topic. I use it quite a bit.
I
But
love that. I
yeah,
love that. And sorry, Benita, I was going to say
yeah.
before, we kind of pivot a little bit more. What I appreciate, and this does tap into what we've been speaking about today. As a conscious leader, we're learning, we're living, and now we're leading. Right? We all lead. One of the things that I just having access, which is amazing, to leaders like yourself, but we also have to talk about fairness. We didn't really spend a lot of time about the fairness aspects of, um, you know, the work that you're doing, what we can do to make this a fair world, fair economy, things like that. Can we just take a moment, because I just felt compelled to just ask that question, like, if you've, in your experiences with many experiences that you've had, are there any, like, maybe 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned about creating a more fair world, a fair economy, things like that you'd like to share?
Thank you. And I think over time, what I've really realized is that one single voice alone, and it's like I said to you at the beginning of this session, was like, no one does it alone. One
Mhm,
single voice can't necessarily do it, but certainly when it's like a crossroads between need and opportunity. And
mm,
we must be ready as grassroots movements or as people to grasp those opportunities when they come, because the social consciousness rises and falls on certain issues, right?
mhm,
So right now, for example, I'm going to use something really timely, but right now there's a conversation on the news around election interference. Let's just use that
right.
one.
Mhm,
Right now would be the time if somebody, to get a movement together on those topics. So I think what I've learned is there's a time for everything. Sometimes the lifting can be really, really heavy for a really, really long time. And
right.
sometimes that's when you just want to stand in your light not a lot of emotional burden during those times, and then just look for the opportunity, because when the opportunity comes, you'll have your people ready and you'll have your movement ready to go. But I think that's something that I've learned, because there's lots of things that I've wanted to champion on equity and fairness, and it just, people aren't listening yet. They're not ready to listen. And this kind of goes back to something that you were just saying earlier, Sandra, about leading. And sometimes leading is just being a light, like not doing anything, just being still in your space, but still having that being true to your core values and just being that still light for a bit. But that is a learning for sure, is that you need to watch for the opportunities and then take advantage of them when you can, and speak up when you can, because you can't do it alone. There has to be a movement behind you.
Those are really powerful lived life lessons, really. Like, it's about that connection. It's about having strategic alliance. It's about having, that your community, if I may, of like-minded people to help support whatever that direction is, whatever that, personal passion is, or, you just have to be prepared. And it's interesting. I reflect back to some of my mentor in Rec Psychs. He talks about how, we evolve ourselves first. It's always that, we change from within to without. And to take that opportunity for you today to ask yourself, who are you? What is it that you're purposeful about, that you're passionate about? And, one thing I've always acknowledged with Bonita is you were always so purposeful and passionate about helping others and doing good work, and being, that change enabler, which for sometimes, you have to stand on your own 2 feet, where there are like-minded, but sometimes you got to stand there on your own, and just having that conviction. And I just want to champion, the viewers to think about that. How are you, how are you showing up? What are you passionate about? What are you, committed to do? And I love Napoleon Hill, where he talks about having, that true, very much focused passion, like the white hot passion that nothing will get in your way. Bonita, you took a number of turns to get to where you are, but you persevered. You amassed your community to support you. And that's what I've always acknowledged. And I really admire that, because it takes, as we talked about earlier, courage, through all of this. So if you were able to share your last kind of remarks, life lessons, journeys for aspiring women who, are like, hey, this sounds like interesting to me. I know I helped facilitate a moderation one time for women in politics, or just women in leadership. Anything you want to share on that as we kind of wrap ourselves up?
So, Sandra, one of my favorite sayings is chips make chunks. And it kind of goes to what you were just saying before as well. Sometimes the advocacy work, like, it can take small win. Small win, 3 years later, another small win on the same thing. I think specifically about the what happened in our city this week around the LGBTQ plus coming to council to get a rainbow flag raised. That started almost over 5 years ago as just a crosswalk. It was quite a push. I mean, I would say to leaders out there that you don't have to win fully the first time. It's small wins are much, much more resilient, and they last a lot longer. So I would just say that. I would say chips make chunks, and that you just little by little by little by little, and within next thing you know, you've got all of these you've got this career behind you, and you're almost looking back saying, wow, yeah,
you look
that
back
happened.
and go, wow, that's amazing. Look at all the stuff. But you were purposeful with that beautiful intention.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
that's the key piece. Again, I'm going to ask again for you to give your details. I like to do that a couple times during the show, how people can get a hold of you.
Sure. Well, you can get to me by email. So it's bonita.zarillo@parle.gc.ca. And if you just Google my name, Bonita Zarillo, you'll see all of my House of Commons contact information. And as I said, if you wanted to see what was happening in Canadian government, you can go to openparliament.com and you can search any word, and you get a good idea of what debates are happening and what issues are front of mind.
I love that. Thank you so much, Bonita. And, as we wrap up our show today, as I said, please take the time now. Ask yourself, challenge yourself, go within to, really dig in and just find that essence of whatever it is that you need to. And then ask yourself, how can you be of service? How can you truly learn some new things, how to build new connections, connect with others that perhaps don't share your same perspective? How can you then take that into living in a way that's powerful and purposeful, that makes a difference, that, as Bonita does, and she just shared, like, I can look back and go, wow, I've done some really great things. It doesn't have to be these huge financial things, or maybe it doesn't have to be at the top of the political game like, Bonita is now. But what change can you create in your own community, within your own family? How can you show up powerful and positive and, have that right amazing mindset with gratitude that you're able to give back, to be of service, and then to lead that. Just like Bonita said, it can take just a little step with purposeful intention to really truly create amazing change. Each and every one of us has that opportunity. So I thank you so much for being my wonderful special guest on the Leadership Podcast. We will be here tomorrow, actually, for another beautiful guest, totally different topic and conversation and so we'll stay tuned tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And thank you, Bonita. Really, I've always appreciated, I've always wanted to get you on my show.
Thank you so much.
Excited. Thank you again. And I'll talk to you on the other side. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.